Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in. Today, we are going to literally step inside the ultimate biological factory to explore the fundamental blueprint that dictates how all living things function. Yep, we're talking about nucleic acids. These are the invisible, microscopic codes that completely define who we are, how we grow, and how our cells operate every single day. So if you've ever found yourself wondering how a tiny cell knows exactly what to do and when to do it, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's unravel the secrets of the genetic code. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start off with the blueprint of life, move on to meet the nucleotide, check out DNA, the double helix, then RNA, the cellular messenger, and finally, we'll wrap up with the central dogma. Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1, the blueprint of life, and look at why these are the most important macromolecules. So take a look at this quote. Nucleic acids are the most important macromolecules for the continuity of life. That is a pretty massive statement, right? But honestly, without them, life as we know it simply stops. DNA and RNA are the foundational materials for literally every single living organism on Earth. Whether we're talking about a super simple single-celled bacteria or a highly complex multicellular mammal like us, the continuity of that species generation after generation relies entirely on these macromolecules holding that cellular blueprint. To really grasp the scale of this blueprint, we've got to understand the genome. Basically, the genome is a cell's entire genetic content. Now, in eukaryotic cells like yours and mine, this DNA doesn't just float around freely. It actually combines with histone proteins to form a complex called chromatin, which is the actual substance that makes up our chromosomes. Think of the genome like a vast, ancient library holding tens of thousands of instruction manuals, or genes. Some code for protein products, some for RNA products, and together, the DNA acts as this master control switch, constantly turning genes on and off to run the whole cellular show. Moving right along to Section 2, let's meet the nucleotide, the molecular building blocks. Now that we've got the macro picture of the genome, let's zoom way in and look at the tiny monomers that build these massive chains. DNA and RNA are what we call polynucleotides, meaning they are basically long chains made of individual links, and those individual links are nucleotides. And every single nucleotide building block is assembled from three very specific parts. Step 1 is a nitrogenous base, an organic molecule with carbon and nitrogen. Step 2 is a pentose, or 5-carbon sugar, and Step 3 is a phosphate group. So the base snaps onto the sugar snaps onto the phosphate, and boom, it's exactly like snapping three highly specific Lego pieces together to form a single functional unit that can then be linked into a chain thousands of units long. Let's look a little closer at that first Lego piece, the nitrogenous base. We can actually divide these bases into two distinct categories based entirely on their physical size and shape. On one side, we've got the purines, adenine and guanine. Structurally, these guys are larger because they have a double ring structure. On the flip side, we have the pyrimidines, cytosine, thymine, and uracil. And pyrimidines only have a single ring. This physical size difference between the double-ring purines and the single-ring pyrimidines is absolutely crucial, as we'll see in just a minute when we talk about DNA structure. Next up, let's check out the second component, the pentose sugar. You might be wondering, what's the actual physical difference between DNA and RNA at the bare-bones molecular level? Well, it all comes down to this sugar. In DNA, the sugar is deoxyribose. In RNA, it's ribose. If you look really closely at the 2' carbon position on these sugars, deoxyribose has just a hydrogen atom, an H, but ribose, it has a whole hydroxyl group, an OH. It is such a tiny molecular difference, but it fundamentally distinguishes DNA from RNA, giving them totally different structural properties. I mean, it literally puts the deoxy in deoxyribonucleic acid. All right, Section 3, DNA, the double helix, or the antiparallel staircase. With our building blocks fully assembled, let's look at the grand architecture they create. As you probably know, DNA forms that iconic double helix structure. Imagine a spiral staircase. The sugar and phosphate groups are on the outside, forming the sturdy exterior railings or the backbone. The nitrogenous bases are stacked on the inside, forming the actual steps. But these steps aren't just thrown together randomly. They follow super strict complementary base pairing rules. Adenine, our larger purine, always pairs with thymine, a smaller pyrimidine. Guanine always pairs with cytosine. They are held together right in the center by hydrogen bonds. And because a double ring always pairs with a single ring, the distance between the two railings remains perfectly uniform all the way down the helix. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. The two strands of the helix don't actually run in the same direction. They run completely opposite to each other. The carbons on the pentose sugar are numbered 1' through 5', right? Well, the 5' end of one strand literally faces the 3' end of its matching strand. It is exactly like a two-lane highway where the roads run right next to each other, but the traffic flows in opposite directions. This anti-parallel setup is absolutely essential for DNA replication to function correctly.
Moving right along to Section 4, RNA, the cellular messenger, acting as our factory intermediary.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can directly compare DNA and RNA side by side. So DNA is securely locked in the nucleus, holding our genetic blueprint. It acts like a master reference book that you absolutely cannot check out of the library. So how does the cell actually build anything? Enter RNA. RNA is our intermediary. It actually leaves the nucleus to synthesize proteins out on the factory floor. Structurally, RNA is usually single-stranded, completely unlike DNA's double helix. We already talked about the ribose versus deoxyribose sugar difference, but look closely at the pyrimidines here. RNA doesn't use thymine at all. Instead, whenever it pairs with adenine, RNA uses uracil. That unique swap is a total dead giveaway that you're looking at an RNA molecule.
And you know, RNA isn't just a one-trick pony. It's an entire specialized workforce. We've got 4 major types teaming up here. First is messenger RNA, or mRNA. When a gene turns on, mRNA copies the DNA code and carries that message out to the cytoplasm. There, it meets ribosomal RNA, or rRNA, which forms the ribosome, the actual workbench where proteins are made. The mRNA is read in these little 3 base sets called codons. Then transfer RNA, or tRNA, which is tiny by the way, usually just 70 to 90 nucleotides long, reads those codons and physically hauls the correct amino acid over to the site to build the protein chain. Finally, microRNA, or miRNA, acts like a factory floor manager, regulating gene expression. It's an incredibly coordinated process.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the Central Dogma, the Flow of Information.
Let's move to how this builds into what scientists actually call the Central Dogma of Life. Basically, the flow of information always goes one way, from DNA to RNA to protein. Step 1. DNA dictates the structure of mRNA through transcription. We are essentially transcribing the code into a transportable message. Step 2. That mRNA travels out of the nucleus and interacts with the ribosomes. Step 3. The RNA dictates the newly formed protein structure through translation. We're literally translating the language of nucleic acids into the completely different language of amino acids and proteins. And the crazy thing, this central dogma holds true for virtually all organisms on the planet. To wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with a critical thinking question. What happens to the DNA structure if a mutation occurs and adenine accidentally replaces cytosine? Think back to those base sizes we talked about earlier. Cytosine is a tiny single-ring pyrimidine. Adenine is a massive double-ring purine. If adenine tries to pair up with guanine, you've suddenly got 2 huge rings crashing into each other. That would cause a literal physical bulge in the DNA's uniform staircase shape. Now, luckily, our cells have built-in machinery to fix this stuff, but when those fixes fail, the consequences can alter the very fabric of an organism. Makes you wonder, how often do you think these microscopic collisions are happening in your body right now? Thanks so much for learning with me today,